There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes that chasing her is the very thing making her run. That being too available, too eager, too invested, too fast, kills the mystery, the intrigue, and worst of all, the respect. See, you've been conditioned to believe that the more you show her you care, the more she'll love you. But that's not how attraction works. Attraction doesn't thrive on comfort, it thrives on tension. On uncertainty. On the silent confidence of a man who could have her, but doesn't need to. The moment you stop giving a damn is the moment the game flips. You stop texting first. You stop waiting by your phone. You stop obsessing over what she's doing and who she's with. Not because you're playing games, but because you're finally playing for you. And guess what happens next? She starts to notice. The same woman who once ignored your good morning texts is now checking your stories. The same woman who kept you on read is now blowing up your phone. Why? Because now, you've become the man who lives for something greater than her validation. You've become the man who values his peace more than attention. You've stepped back into your power. You don't need to argue. You don't need to beg. You don't need to explain. Your silence now speaks volumes. And in that silence, she hears everything she was too blind to see before. That you were the real one. That you had standards. That you were the man she should have appreciated before she pushed you away. So stop giving a damn, not to hurt her, not to manipulate her, but to heal you. The day you reclaim your focus is the day she loses hers. Not because you did anything to her, but because you finally did something for yourself. Let her wonder. Let her chase. Let her drown in the emptiness she created when she underestimated you. You're not cold. You're just done proving your worth to someone who didn't value it in the first place. Neediness kills attraction. It's one of the most overlooked but powerful truths when it comes to relationships and dating. And it's not just about what you say, it's about what you project. You can be saying all the right words, sending the sweetest messages, giving all the compliments in the world, but if it's coming from a place of desperation, of needing her approval or her presence to feel like a man, it backfires. Attraction dies the moment a woman senses that you need her more than she needs you. See, neediness isn't about being kind. It's not about being attentive or emotionally open. Those are healthy things in the right context. Neediness is when you begin to compromise your identity, your boundaries, and your sense of self-worth just to keep someone around. It's when you start living for her texts, her replies, her attention, when your happiness becomes tied to whether or not she responds or validates you. That energy? It suffocates the room. It takes all the space where mystery, desire, and respect were supposed to live, and it replaces it with insecurity. And women can feel it. Not because they're manipulative or cruel, but because attraction is emotional, not logical. She can't always explain it, but she knows when something feels off. A man who's too eager, too available, too ready to drop everything at a moment's notice sends a silent message, I don't have anything else going on that matters more than you. And while that might seem romantic in theory, in practice, it screams of a man who lacks purpose, direction, and confidence. A man who has made her the center of his world before she's even earned that position. When you chase a woman too hard, when you prioritize her so far above yourself that your actions become driven by the fear of losing her, it flips the dynamic. She doesn't feel pursued, she feels pressured. She doesn't feel flattered, she feels burdened. You've made her your emotional oxygen, and no one wants to carry that weight. Women are drawn to men who are rooted in themselves. Men who know who they are, what they want, and where they're going, with or without her. That certainty? That calm, unwavering presence? That's what creates gravity. That's what pulls her in. But neediness repels. Because it signals one thing, lack. Lack of internal strength. Lack of emotional control. Lack of self-worth. And when you come from lack, you try to fill it with someone else. You ask her to complete you, to validate you, to constantly reassure you that she's not leaving. You ask with your words, your behavior, and your energy, and it becomes too much. She starts to pull away, not out of malice, but because your need for her presence makes her feel responsible for your emotional stability. And that's not attractive. That's exhausting. Now here's the brutal irony: the more you chase, the more she runs. The more you call, the less she answers. The more you show how much you care, the more she starts to question why she doesn't feel the same level of desire back. Because neediness disrupts polarity. It flips masculine energy into submission. And women aren't drawn to submission, they're drawn to quiet strength, to independence, to men who offer space and freedom, not clinginess and control. Most guys don't realize this. They think effort means calling constantly, texting endlessly, showering her with attention. And while there's nothing wrong with genuine affection, it becomes a problem when it's driven by fear, fear of losing her, fear of not being enough, fear of being alone. That's when effort turns into overcompensation. That's when what you think is romantic becomes uncomfortable. Because underneath every action is an energy, and if that energy is rooted in anxiety, she'll feel it, even if she can't articulate why it turns her off. What truly attracts a woman is the man who can walk away. Not out of arrogance. Not out of games. But because he respects himself enough not to chase someone who doesn't reciprocate. He doesn't need constant reassurance, because his confidence is internal, not dependent on external reaction. He knows that his value isn't diminished just because one woman doesn't see it. And that energy? That unbothered calm? That's magnetic. You don't win a woman's heart by giving her yours on a silver platter before she's even earned it. You win it by being a man who doesn't need her to validate his worth. You win it by being so grounded in who you are that you never have to prove yourself. You show up fully, authentically, and if she meets you there, great. If she doesn't, you keep moving. Neediness is the opposite of self-respect. It's the silent message that says, "You're better than me, and I need your approval to feel whole." But a man who values himself, who walks in purpose, who commands his own life, never has to beg for attention. He becomes the man she thinks about. The man she wonders about. The man she starts to miss when he's no longer around. Because he gave her space to feel his absence, and in that space, attraction grows. Stop chasing. Start leading. Because when you stop needing her, that's when she starts wanting you. Power shifts the moment you detach emotionally, not because you've stopped caring entirely, but because you've reclaimed control over what deserves your emotional energy. Emotional detachment is not coldness. It's not apathy. It's clarity. It's choosing to no longer let someone else's inconsistency, silence, or lack of commitment dictate your internal state. And the moment you reach that point, everything changes, especially the power dynamic in any relationship where you were once overly invested. When you are emotionally attached to someone who doesn't reciprocate, you give them the steering wheel to your peace of mind. You wait for their text. You monitor their energy. You constantly wonder what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they want. Your thoughts orbit around them while they move freely, often unaware, or worse, indifferent, to how much space they occupy in your world. That imbalance is where the power begins to tilt. Because the one who is most emotionally invested, especially prematurely or disproportionately, often ends up in the weaker position. When you detach emotionally, that imbalance begins to correct itself. You stop reacting to every message or lack of message. You stop overanalyzing their tone or their emoji use. You no longer place your worth in their attention or their mood. And what that creates is space, mental space, emotional space, even spiritual space. Space for you to see clearly. Space to breathe. Space for them to feel the shift they never expected. Because once they no longer feel your constant emotional presence, your energy pulls back, and it creates a vacuum. People don't value what's always available. Familiarity, when unearned, breeds complacency. That's why the person who's always texting, always calling, always showing up uninvited starts to feel invisible, not because they aren't good enough, but because they're too accessible. When you were emotionally wrapped up in her, your attention became predictable, guaranteed, and thus, taken for granted. But once you detach, even slightly, your absence becomes noticeable. It raises questions. Why isn't he chasing like he used to? Why do I feel a shift? That uncertainty, once your burden, becomes hers. The beauty of emotional detachment is that it doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to block anyone. You don't need to announce your decision. It's silent, internal, and powerful. You're no longer trying to win her over. You're no longer proving yourself. You've stepped back, not out of bitterness, but because you've seen the reality for what it is. And that act alone flips the script. Suddenly, you're not the one waiting anymore. You're not the one clinging. You've become the one with standards. The one who can walk away. The one she can no longer read as easily. Women are intuitive. They may not always notice what's said, but they feel the energy shift. When a man who once poured everything into her suddenly seems indifferent, it disrupts her emotional rhythm. It introduces doubt. It makes her reconsider. Not because you manipulated her, but because you stopped giving more than you were receiving. That balance is essential. When she no longer has control over how you feel, she realizes she never really understood your value. That realization stings. It's not punishment. It's the cost of underestimating someone who had genuine intentions but finally chose to protect himself. Detachment also unlocks your focus. You regain time and mental clarity you once spent overthinking texts, interpreting signals, and worrying about outcomes. Now, your energy goes toward your mission, your goals, your self-mastery. You elevate. And that elevation, that forward momentum, is often the very thing that reignites her interest. Why? Because nothing is more attractive than a man who doesn't chase, who moves forward without apology. You become the man she wants to figure out, not the man she feels she has figured out. That's the irony. When you wanted her most, she felt least drawn to you. But now that you've let go, now that you've pulled back emotionally, you become scarce. Scarcity creates value. You're no longer handing your emotions over for free. She has to wonder, to question, to work for your attention in ways she never had to before. And if she doesn't? If she disappears instead of stepping up? That's still a win. Because your emotional detachment not only shifted the power, it revealed the truth. It exposed who was real and who was just enjoying your energy without ever intending to reciprocate. This is not about playing games. It's about preserving your peace. When you give too much too soon, you teach people they don't have to earn you. But when you pull back and reconnect with yourself, your standards, your power, you teach people to respect your presence. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel everything, but you choose what you respond to. You choose not to invest in what drains you. You choose yourself. And when you do that, you don't have to say a word. Your detachment speaks for you. And more often than not, it's the loudest message they'll ever hear. Your value as a man doesn't come from her attention. It doesn't come from how many compliments she gives you, how often she texts you, or whether she chooses you today or not. Your value comes from your purpose, your internal drive, your mission, the reason you get up in the morning and refuse to quit. That's where true confidence is born. That's where unshakable self-worth is forged. Because anything that's rooted in her validation can be taken away. But when it's rooted in your purpose, it's untouchable. Most men spend their lives chasing women, hoping their attention will make them feel significant. They mold themselves to be liked. They say what they think she wants to hear. They sacrifice their time, their boundaries, even their dreams to keep her around. And in doing so, they abandon the one thing that actually makes them attractive, their focus. Their drive. Their relentless pursuit of something bigger than just being liked. Women might enjoy the attention for a moment, but what really holds their respect is a man who is locked into his purpose with or without them. When you let your purpose define you, everything changes. You stop reacting emotionally to every shift in her behavior. If she pulls away, you don't panic, you stay grounded. If she shows interest, you don't lose yourself in excitement, you stay balanced. You're no longer riding the highs and lows of her attention like a drug addict looking for his next fix. You've built your own foundation. You've developed your own identity. And that self-possession, that internal strength, is magnetic in a way that constant pursuit never could be. Attention is fleeting. Today she's all over you. Tomorrow she's cold and distant. If you tie your value to her approval, you'll live in emotional chaos. One moment you'll feel like a king, the next like a ghost. And that roller coaster will drain you. It'll make you anxious, confused, and needy. You'll start adjusting yourself, becoming what you think she wants instead of standing firm in who you are. You'll shrink to fit inside her comfort zone rather than expanding into your own greatness. But a man who's locked into his purpose? He doesn't flinch. He doesn't beg for attention. He's too busy building. Purpose is what gives a man edge. It sharpens his discipline. It demands his energy and forces him to rise beyond his weaknesses. And that transformation? That quiet evolution of character and strength? That's what draws the right kind of woman in. Because when she sees a man living for something beyond her, it challenges her. It shows her that he's not another boy looking for a mother or a cheerleader. He's a man on a mission. And being in his life is not a right, it's a privilege. The problem is, most men think getting the girl is the goal. So they abandon the path the moment she shows up. They stop grinding. They lose intensity. They redirect all their fire toward pleasing her. And what happens? She loses interest. Not because she's ungrateful or cruel, but because the very thing that drew her to him, his drive, his ambition, his self-respect, has vanished. He made her the mission. And no woman wants to be the mission. She wants to be inspired by it, maybe even included in it. But the moment she becomes the center of your universe, the polarity is gone. And with it, her attraction. You don't chase women. You chase purpose. And the right women are drawn to that energy. Not because you're ignoring them or playing games, but because they feel your depth. They sense your direction. They know you have standards. And most importantly, they know you'll never give your soul away just to get attention. That kind of man is rare. That kind of man is irresistible. He doesn't beg, because he doesn't need to. He doesn't fold under pressure, because his values are bigger than his desires. He stands tall, even in silence, because he knows exactly who he is without anyone's applause. The truth is, any attention you have to work too hard to get is usually not worth having. If a woman only sees your value when you're constantly proving it, she doesn't see your real worth, she sees a performance. But when you stop performing, when you stay rooted in your purpose and let your presence do the talking, she has to make a choice, either rise to meet you or walk away. And either outcome is fine. Because your mission doesn't stop. Your self-worth doesn't dip. You don't collapse just because someone else couldn't recognize your fire. This is the shift every man must make if he wants peace, power, and respect. Stop measuring your worth by how many women text you back. Stop giving your confidence away to people who didn't earn it. Stop living like your value is something to be discovered by someone else. It's already there, waiting to be activated by discipline, direction, and drive. That's how you stop chasing and start attracting. That's how you stop needing and start leading. When your identity is built on your purpose, not her attention, no one can take it from you. Silence is louder than words because it carries the weight of what's unsaid. It's the pause that speaks volumes, the space where someone has to sit with their thoughts, their assumptions, and their doubts. In a world addicted to noise, reactions, and instant replies, silence becomes a power move. It's not absence. It's presence without effort. And when you master it, you don't just gain control over your emotions, you gain influence over the situation itself. People often think communication is all about talking, explaining, or proving. But sometimes the most impactful message you can deliver is delivered with nothing at all. When you don't respond, when you don't argue, when you don't chase, your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects back to others their own behavior, their own words, and their own energy. It forces them to confront themselves without the distraction of your defense. And in that stillness, the truth becomes inescapable. When someone pulls away from you, insults you, disrespects you, or plays games, the instinct is to fire back, to defend your name, to prove your worth, to make them understand. But the moment you do that, you hand them control. You let their actions dictate your behavior. Silence, on the other hand, is self-possession. It's the decision to not give your energy where it isn't respected. It's the ultimate boundary. You're saying, you don't get access to my emotions until you've earned it. And the most powerful part? Silence can't be misquoted. It doesn't twist your words. It doesn't open you up to manipulation. It just is. Raw, real, and undeniable. It creates tension, not because you're being passive-aggressive, but because it strips the game away. It puts the ball in their court and forces them to act without you spoon-feeding them a reaction. They're left with themselves, and that's a far louder message than any rant could deliver. Especially in relationships, silence shifts the dynamic. When someone expects you to always be available, to always respond, to always explain yourself, your silence becomes a shock to the system. It disrupts the pattern. It introduces unpredictability. That unpredictability creates curiosity, and curiosity turns into tension. They start wondering why you're not saying anything. They start replaying their last words. They start feeling your absence. And that absence often makes them realize what your presence was worth. Most people confuse silence with weakness. But the truth is, silence takes more strength than speaking. It's easy to lash out. It's easy to argue. It's easy to try and fix things through words. What's hard is knowing you could say something, and choosing not to. What's hard is trusting that your silence says everything you need it to. Because when you're silent, you're not trying to win a debate, you're proving you don't need to. You're not desperate for understanding. You've already made peace with your truth. There's also a certain mystery in silence. When you talk too much, explain too much, reveal too much, you become predictable. People know how to read you, how to manipulate your emotions, how to get a rise out of you. But when you're quiet, you become unpredictable. You become a puzzle. And people are always more intrigued by what they don't fully understand. That's why some of the most charismatic, powerful people in history were those who spoke little but moved with intention. They didn't need to speak often because when they did, it meant something. Silence also gives you time. Time to think. Time to observe. Time to see who's real and who only sticks around when you're doing all the work. When you go silent, you start seeing who reaches out without being prompted. Who cares when there's nothing in it for them? Who misses your presence when it's no longer freely given? And that clarity is priceless. You stop guessing. You stop giving benefit of the doubt. You let the silence filter the people in your life, and it always tells you more than words ever could. In conflict, silence is your shield. It doesn't mean you're avoiding responsibility. It means you're protecting your peace. You're refusing to escalate, to be baited, to lower your standards just to win an argument. You're allowing space for reflection, for tension to settle, for real emotions to surface. And often, what people say after silence is far more honest than what they say in the heat of the moment. Silence gives people the room to realize, to regret, and to return with more clarity. Sometimes, your silence is the closure. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much to keep repeating yourself to someone who wasn't listening. Sometimes, silence is the strength to walk away from something that's beneath your peace. And sometimes, silence is the loudest way to say, I know my worth. In the end, silence is not the absence of communication. It's the elevation of it. It's the quiet storm that forces others to listen more deeply, to question more honestly, and to feel more intensely. It's the tool of the man who doesn't just react, but decides. And in a world full of noise, that kind of silence doesn't go unnoticed. It echoes, pulling back forces her to reassess because it interrupts the emotional rhythm she's gotten used to. When a man consistently gives his time, attention, and energy, It creates a pattern, a sense of reliability she may not even consciously register. She knows he'll text back. She knows he'll be there. She knows, deep down, that she's the center of his focus. And when something becomes predictable, it often becomes invisible. The more you give without pause, the more she stops noticing what she's receiving. But the moment you pull back, not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet self-respect, you disrupt that flow. And in the silence that follows, something important happens. She begins to question what she once took for granted. When you remove your energy from someone's life, they are forced to confront the void you leave behind. It doesn't matter how subtle the shift is, whether it's slower replies, fewer check-ins, or simply no longer initiating contact, it registers. The mind catches what the heart used to ignore. Suddenly, the effort you once poured into her isn't there to cushion her self-doubt, to reassure her value, or to inflate her ego. That emotional fuel she casually accepted disappears, and with it comes a kind of discomfort that makes her look inward. Was it something she said? Did she go too far? Why isn't he reacting like before? And those questions are where reflection starts. Most people don't reflect until something changes. As long as the environment stays consistent, they coast. But the moment something familiar disappears, the human brain instinctively searches for meaning. And when a man pulls back from a woman who once felt his constant emotional presence, her mind begins to rewind. She revisits past conversations. She re-examines his tone. She replays how she acted. She notices the difference. And that awareness often leads her to feel the one thing she never expected, uncertainty. Not about him, but about herself. You see, when a woman is sure of your presence, she never has to evaluate her own. She never has to measure her effort, because she's been passively receiving the rewards of your pursuit. But the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop feeding the dynamic, she's left to reflect on her own behavior. Did she reciprocate enough? Was she dismissive? Did she push too far, assuming he'd always come back? These aren't just passing thoughts, they're the kind of reflections that recalibrate how she views you. Because now you're no longer the man desperately trying to win her. You've become the man she has to wonder about. Pulling back also shifts perception. While you were always available, your value was tied to your access. But now that you've created space, your value starts to feel exclusive. Scarcity creates demand. When something isn't as easily accessed, people start to reevaluate its importance. That's not manipulation, that's human psychology. Think about anything people once ignored but suddenly wanted the moment it became less accessible. The same dynamic applies in relationships. The moment you stop giving without boundaries, she begins to realize the cost of what she never had to earn. And this isn't about playing hard to get, it's about returning to your center. When you pull back, it should never be to provoke a reaction. It should be because you've realized you've been overextending, overgiving, and maybe even undervaluing yourself. You're not punishing her. You're prioritizing yourself. And that realignment changes the energy. She can feel that you're no longer trying to convince her. You've stopped seeking approval. You've started acting from a place of grounded confidence. And that, ironically, is what often draws people back, not the chase, but the detachment from it. In the space your absence creates, she sees you differently. She may remember your kindness not as a given, but as a gift. She may replay your conversations not with boredom, but with nostalgia. She may look at your photos, read your texts, and feel a tinge of longing. That longing is the byproduct of contrast, what she felt when you were near versus what she feels now that you've stepped away. And the emotional clarity that comes from that contrast is often what drives reassessment. She begins to consider whether she misunderstood you, underestimated you, or mishandled the connection entirely. But perhaps most importantly, pulling back reveals what was real. If she truly valued you, your silence will be deafening. She will notice. She will wonder. She may reach out, apologize, or even try to match your energy for the first time. But if she doesn't? If your absence is met with more silence, indifference, or ego-driven retaliation, then your pulling back gave you something even more valuable than her reassessment. It gave you clarity. It showed you that your presence was never truly being honored in the first place. That's the hidden gift in stepping back. It's not just about shifting the dynamic, it's about discovering the truth. Who is she when she no longer feels in control? Who is she when the power to engage lies in your hands instead of hers? Who is she when she has to do the reaching instead of always being reached for? Pulling back isn't weakness. It's a test of reality. And it always brings out one of two things, either a renewed appreciation, or a confirmed disinterest. Either way, you win. Because pulling back didn't just force her to reassess. It reminded you of your own worth. It's not about revenge, it's about self-respect. That line separates the weak from the strong, the emotionally wounded from the emotionally mature. Walking away, going silent, choosing distance, those moves don't always mean you're trying to punish someone. Sometimes they simply mean you've had enough. Not enough love, not enough validation, not enough anger, just enough of the realization that your worth is not up for debate, and your peace is not up for auction. What looks like a cold shoulder to them is really just a boundary drawn with wisdom. And when you stop responding, it's not an act of cruelty, it's a declaration of dignity. Revenge is loud. It's messy. It craves attention. But self-respect? It's quiet. Clean. Unapologetic. It doesn't scream, "You hurt me and I'm going to make you pay." It says, "You hurt me, and I'm done allowing that access." It doesn't seek to teach them a lesson, they can teach themselves if they ever choose to look back. Self-respect doesn't require closure, applause, or retaliation. It just walks. Not because it doesn't care, but because it refuses to stay where it isn't honored. When you act out of revenge, you're still controlled by them. You're still emotionally entangled. They pull the string, and you react. But when you act out of self-respect, you're controlled by yourself. You're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to heal you. And healing isn't about inflicting pain. It's about refusing to accept it any longer. So when you stop texting, stop explaining, stop begging them to understand, it's not bitterness. It's clarity. The kind that only comes after you've tolerated more than you should have, for longer than you should have. They might try to label your distance as ego, pride, or even toxicity. Let them. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will always see your boundaries as betrayal. But the truth is, you're not doing it to win. You're doing it to stop losing yourself. You're not trying to teach them how to treat you, you're teaching yourself what you will no longer accept. That's the difference. Revenge is outward-focused. It depends on their reaction. Self-respect is inward-focused. It doesn't need one. A man who moves with self-respect doesn't need to slam the door. He just stops holding it open. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg for recognition. He doesn't keep bleeding to prove he cared. He knows that walking away in silence is more powerful than staying and screaming. He knows that his energy is currency, and he spends it only where it brings return. And when it doesn't? He takes the loss, learns the lesson, and levels up. Not for her to notice, but for him to grow. You can forgive someone and still remove them from your life. You can love someone and still let them go. You can care about what you had and still refuse to relive the disrespect. That's not being heartless, that's having a heart that finally learned not to abandon itself. And when you leave with grace instead of vengeance, you leave a different kind of impact. Not one that wounds, but one that echoes. Because the silence of a man who respects himself is often louder than the cries of a man who doesn't. They may expect you to fold. To come crawling back. To give them the reaction that feeds their ego. But when all they get is stillness, all they're left with is themselves. That's not punishment. That's just what it feels like when they finally have to sit with the consequences of no longer having you. And if they come back, it won't be because you manipulated them. It'll be because your absence made them realize what your presence was worth. And if they don't? Then your silence saved you from a deeper betrayal. Self-respect is what you give yourself when no one else does. It's the voice that says, even if no one claps for me, I'm still standing tall. It's the strength to not play the game, to not lower your character to match someone else's chaos. And it's the peace that comes from knowing you didn't lose them, they lost you. Because you didn't walk away with spite. You walked away with your soul intact. Don't confuse that strength with weakness. Society may tell you that real men confront everything head-on. But true strength is knowing when not to fight. It's knowing when the battle costs more than the victory is worth. It's realizing that peace of mind is a better prize than proving a point. So when you pull back, stay quiet, or move on, it's not because you're afraid of conflict. It's because you've outgrown the need for it. In the end, revenge leaves a trail of fire. Self-respect leaves a clean break. One destroys, the other builds. One is a response to pain, the other is a commitment to healing. You get to choose which one guides you. And if you ever have to choose between proving them wrong and proving yourself right, choose you. Every time. Because your life is not a courtroom. You don't need to present evidence for why you're done. You just need to be done. That's not revenge. That's power. So stop chasing. Stop explaining. Stop breaking yourself down just to be understood by someone who only listened when it benefited her. Because the moment you stop giving a damn, not out of hate, but out of clarity, is the moment the power shifts. She feels it. She notices the silence where your validation used to be. She starts to question herself in the same way you once questioned your worth. And that's when everything changes. Not because you tried to hurt her, but because you finally chose you. And nothing is more attractive, or more powerful, than a man who walks away from chaos and stands firm in his peace. When you stop giving a damn, she doesn't just lose control, she starts losing her mind. And you? You finally get your freedom.